Okej, to może ja na sam początek parę słów wstępu i będę mówił po angielsku już, żeby Saba też rozumiał, o co chodzi. So I will switch to English and yes. So today we have meeting with Sabą Nazarian, who will present us his work around small-scale farming, and the context for our meeting is an initiative which we are working on in Warsaw with few NGOs and some people from Warsaw University of Life Science, with cooperation with Warsaw Municipality, I hope, because we are still don't have the final answer from them. The idea, the project is to build a small farm in the in the south region of the city. There is already a place, a land which is very interesting, and
how big is this land? Just out of curiosity.
This land is 3.5 hectares.
Beautiful.
Yes, so it's quite a big parcel, and tomorrow I want to invite all of you for the exhibition, which is taking place in the Jazdów settlement in the Solatorium, one of the Finnish houses, and this is exhibition about this place. In the context of, let's say in a philosophical or ethical context, about changing the wasteland, the green wasteland, which is now displaced, into the farm. We were working on this since a few weeks, and that's it will be the results of our work. So
beautiful.
Saba, I will send you maybe some materials about this exhibition to share with you this work, and I also hope that we will have a possibility to invite you to come to us.
I would really love to. I would really love to.
Yes, I hope it will happen next in the coming year. So that's all from my side, and Saba.
Yes, sir.
The floor is yours.
All right. My pleasure. Okay, so it looks like we have Anna, Wakta, and I'm really sorry if I pronounce anyone's names wrong or in a really bad way. So please accept my apologies beforehand. Claudia, Graza, Nina, Zieloni, I guess, Julian, and Maya. Okay. If you had any, so I'm going to go through this presentation, and if you had any questions, please feel free to either write it down for the end of the presentation, because we have left some time for the questions and answers. If not, or if you feel like you need to interrupt me and really dig into the question, just raise your hand, or maybe Mesha can help facilitate getting people's questions. Maybe it also would be nice if you can, if it's easier and more comfortable for you, maybe you can write it in Polish, and then we can, with your help, we can translate them, and that way it's easier for people to formulate their questions. Sounds good?
Yes. Perfect. Yes, great. And also we can, if somebody have a question, also maybe you can write in the chat, and it will be collected there to for the end of the presentation.
Beautiful. Okay. The only thing is that I don't have access to the chat function while I'm in full presentation mode. So once I'm done with the presentation, I will shut down the presentation, and then we can go through the questions. Does that sound good?
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm actually located in Canada, so it's 9 in the morning here. Really glad to be given this opportunity to be with you guys, and would love to have the opportunity to actually come and visit this project that you guys are working with. So my name is Saba, and I have been working as a farm director, educator, and consultant at the Botilemor organization in Sweden, south of Sweden, that runs a very interesting project called Stadsbruk, which is a play on words, stad being city and bruk coming from jordbruk, which is agriculture. So it's a program that has focused on creating physical spaces for people who would like to practice small-scale agriculture and start small farming businesses, and we help them basically find their first customers, understand the entrepreneurship that goes into the small business of farming. And as I go through the slides, I'm gonna discuss what is it that we do through that project, and also some of my previous work that I'm gonna mention here. So on today's agenda, I thought that I would talk a little bit about small-scale farming and how it is changing our world. We're gonna dive into the why, the reason behind what I think small-scale farming is doing in our world, and what is it exactly that it's doing. And through the final slides, we're gonna get into the how part. How is it possible to actually do this? Is it possible? We're going to go through some case studies. There's a few farms that I have personally visited and have worked at and have got my training. I'm going to talk a little bit about my personal journey into this whole thing, for anyone who might feel like, okay, I don't come from a farming background. I don't even know why I'm doing what I'm doing here in this presentation. And also we're gonna talk about how one can actually replicate and multiply these small, very productive and profitable farms in the European context. So that is gonna end up leading with talking about the ecosystems that this particular project has created, the different components of this ecosystem, being the incubator program, a test bed, which is a physical space for farmers to test their learnings, and an educational farm that also functions as a model farm, as a reference model for people to refer to and learn things from, and then go and apply it directly on their farms. And at the end of the presentation, we'll leave some time for Q&A. So the term small-scale farming is mainly referred to farms that are operated without the help of machinery and big tractors that you normally see in big agriculture. So, and the reason that why these small farms are becoming more and more popular, at least in my opinion, or my observation, observing these type of farming models over the last 8 years, is that because the average age of farmers in majority of European cities, and also where I come from in Canada, is really, really high. And you know, it could be 60 or 65 years farmers that are basically going out of the business, or maybe they're having a hard time finding their replacements because maybe their children are not really interested in carrying forward the operation. The farm sizes obviously have also increased over time because of the model behind industrial agriculture, where a lot of agrochemicals are being used, and that of course doesn't necessarily help with the biology in the soil, leading to a lot of problems, such as compaction of the soil with running machinery, heavy machinery on the farms. And basically the degradation that we've been seeing over the last 5 years that has been amplified, has been really outnumbered. All the negative consequences of this giant agriculture systems that are constantly in need of increasing their inputs, the agrochemicals that they use, the pesticides, the herbicides, all the fossil fuel based fertilizers that they use, and all the negative things that has happened, such as deforestation problems, or desertification, or chemical runoffs from the farms that end up in fresh groundwater and things like that. I'm pretty sure that a lot of people that are sitting here with us are quite aware of that. So with all of these negative things happening, of course, there is always a group of people that really are seeing it, and they have, there has been an awakening among this group of people that might come from many, many different backgrounds. They might not even have had any chance of growing up on a farm. Maybe they're city people that are educating themselves about the negative consequences of the way that we have been producing food, and they're basically questioning the whole system that we have built that is not working and it's broken. And this new wave, I find that they want to be part of the solution rather than the problem. And instead of being a consumer that constantly buys the products that are grown maybe miles and miles away, kilometers away, they actually want to act as food actors and producers. They want to become producers to be able to create solutions. These group of people normally want to do this because they think that it's a rebellious act against the norm, or against the system that we have been so used to, and without questioning it. So you can think of it as a revolutionary act that this group of people are taking action to do something that they think that change needs to take place, right? So I happen to be one of the people that had no background in farming personally. I mainly worked as a musician, as a sound engineer in my 20s. And basically, after questioning a lot of things and learning about things that normally you don't learn in the university system, I ended up really seeing the negative aspects that we are seeing in the world, and I wanted to do something about it. And of course, being interested in sustainability and constantly hearing about the word sustainability, just led me down a rabbit hole to find out, okay, is changing light bulbs or taking shorter showers or cycling to work or university really a solution to this, or are there bigger problems that need more smarter solutions? And somehow I think as I came across learning about how the food system has caused so much damage to the way that we're living and the way that we're producing, it really caught my attention. I felt like I am so disconnected from where my food comes from and how it is produced, which of course it was a very frustrating feeling, and I'm sure that you guys might have also felt that feeling. So that basically guided me towards thinking about my food and whether if I could actually do something for my own self, knowing that, okay, I don't come from that agricultural background. There's no way that I don't know how to farm. I've never taken care of a single plant. So what do I do? And this picture that you see here in this slide is me after a couple of months of trying to grow a bunch of stuff in my apartment in the middle of winter, Canadian winter, where nothing really grows. And, with big Canadian cities, we don't actually have much access to piece of land. within cities, if you're living in a city, if you're a city person. So I had to look at things that I could grow indoors, things that could give me the highest nutritional value, and things that I could actually grow the whole year on vertical spaces. So I ended up basically using some shelves and some fluorescent lights to grow um, 8 to 10 different varieties of microgreens. These are probably things that you see in grocery stores or health food stores. They're super delicious and packed with a lot of vitamins and minerals. And they have increased the huge popularity among chefs and health practitioners. So I could see after a few months of including these in my diet, actually, I was feeling great about it. So, but in today's presentation, we're not going to really talk much about what I've done, but I wanted to basically show that I don't come from this agriculture background, and within lectures and presentations that I give to my students often, this is a way for me to say that, okay, if I was able to do it as someone who had no idea what he was doing, and I got to this point that I am now running this farm and designing farming ecosystems for other municipalities and things like that, so can you too. So moving on from that, wanted to talk about what is it that, what are we talking about when it comes to small scale farming? So if I wanted to very briefly talk about the most important thing in this type of farming, and that would be the soil health, which is something that is often not looked at in the bigger agriculture. So through small scale farming practices, we really want to focus on increasing the soil biology, and we want to make sure that we're using systems, we're designing it in a way that is human scale, and it's that we can optimize our operation and production to be able to grow the most amount of food in the least amount of space, which is really contrary to how you find vegetable production, for example, on very big farms, because it's designed, the whole layout and design of the farm is a way that machinery can go into the field. And of course, if you're having a really wet spring or you're coming out of winter, there's always problems with flooding or the soil being too wet and the tractor gets stuck and things like that. So whatever we're talking about today on small scale farming world, it's farming that is human scale, and there is no presence of or little presence of tractors. Everything's done by hand, everything's done by, it's you can think of it as a craftsmanship, by really smart tools that actually have been designed for making the farmer's life easier, and really interesting innovative models of tools that have come to the market over the last 5 to 10 years that really allows the farmer to optimize what they're doing on the farm. And majority of the small scale farms use a system called permanent raised beds. In this picture, you can see the kale and the lady who is standing in the rows. On the behind her and in front of her, there is a little bit of a slope you can see on the beds that have been raised, and that is because these beds are never disturbed by big machinery. So you're constantly building that organic matter on top of it year after year by adding compost and manure, and really making sure that you're taking care of the soil health, building the organic matter for worms to work the soil and basically aerate the soil. And of course, there is practices where once a crop is finished and you want to get rid of whatever residue that is left in the bed, you come in with really smart tools, really primitive tools actually. You aerate the soil to be able to get more oxygen in there, get more water out of the bed to evaporate, and then prepare it again, add more compost, and then you're ready to plant again. Whereas in a bigger agriculture practice, there is constant soil compaction and soil disturbance by machinery that just comes in and turns the soil or discs it or harrows it, or all of these techniques that we have with tractors. So the focus of these farms are to, as I said, grow the most amount of food in the least amount of space. And that means that there is much less space between the rows of the vegetables, which creates a canopy around the raised bed that shades out the sun. So that basically slows down the growth of weeds, which basically ends up in a situation where you don't need to use pesticides or herbicides to kill the weeds. And with, of course, using certain tools and really planning and making sure that you have a weeding schedule, you can potentially end up with a beautiful farm that is almost weed-free, and it primarily focuses on the food production rather than cultivating the soil and disturbing it. So the focus is on growing high value and high yielding crops. So on these farms, you don't usually see a lot of land being dedicated for corn or wheat or potato production, because you wouldn't necessarily get a high value when it comes to high monetary value when it comes to selling it on the market. So the focus is really on really fast growing salad greens, baby root vegetables, many different types of root vegetables, crops such as kale that the farmer can harvest in a really long-term season without having to plant again, or let's say setting up greenhouses with tomatoes and peppers and eggplant production, and making sure that those covered areas of the farm, such as tunnels and greenhouses, are also used during the winter months for extending the season and making sure that you have some varieties of products to sell during the colder months of the year. And of course, the small-scale farmers try their best to cut the middleman by selling directly to customers and the community that they're feeding. So when it comes to some of the case studies that I wanted to talk about, maybe we can go a little bit deeper and see, okay, what kind of farms are we talking about? What kind of numbers do they have? And how much do they generate? The farms that I have showcased in this case study for today are farms that I have personally worked on and I have got my training. And because of the lack of time that we had in this presentation, I only narrowed it down to 3 or 4 farms that we're going to look at. So the first farm is a farm where I got my training 6 years ago. It's located in British Columbia. It was actually an urban farm that was on 3 different plots of the city. So the farmer would basically jump on an electric bike that was connected to a cargo, and then would move from one location to another within the city limits. You could imagine these plots were about 5 to 10 kilometer radius around all the customers that it served. So a very small farm, about 1,200 square meter of space under cultivation, which had a home base where there was a couple of greenhouses and a post-harvest area where all the vegetables were conditioned, washed, packed, and labeled for delivery purposes, or maybe customers showed up to the farm to pick up their vegetables. And the farm was mainly run by one full-time farmer, one part-time, that generated about 55,000 euros per season. And when I say season or year, this, again, we have to look at the context. In Canada, the growing season is much shorter than what you guys have in Poland, probably, because of the temperature drop and also the latitude, lack of sun and sunlight. So that 55,000 euros would be generated in the course of, let's say, 8 months out of the year, right? And this farm really pushed the limits of education. So it had a lot of workshops and courses that the farmer was running. So that full-time farmer ended up working basically taking care of the majority of the production, and then the part-time farmer was taking care of a lot of study visits and educational classes and courses, and also teaching to interns that would come in different intervals throughout the year. Then the second farm that I'm showcasing here is a farm on the east coast of the country in Canada, in the French side, called Jardin de la Grelinette, which is run by one of my mentors, Jean-Martin Fortier, who has published a book called The Market Gardener. I think it's definitely a must to read this book if you ever think of starting a farm or passing on the knowledge to anyone who's interested in starting these farms. I look at it as a Bible. This farm is on 10,000 square meter, and it's not a city farm. It's on the countryside, about 35, maybe 45 minutes away from Montreal, which is the second biggest city in Canada, and employs about 2 full-time or 4 part-time employees. That generates about 100,000 euros per season. And again, being on the French side and the heavy snow load that they get, the growing season is no longer than 8 months. So that's what they do. And then during the winter months, they shut down the farm. They do a lot of planning and some courses and lectures like I do. And then they kick off the season again at the end of January with starting a lot of seedlings and tomatoes to go into the greenhouses. So this particular farm really focuses on feeding families around them. So they have a community of about 200 to 250 families that they feed. And it has been one of the most productive farms that I have seen traveling around. They really have done a great job of focusing on growing the most amount of food on the least amount of space. So every square meter of space in this place is used for growing vegetables. A lot of focus is on annual production. And because the family lives on the farm here, of course, they have dedicated some parts of the farm for perennial or berries and fruit production for themselves. Now, this farm that we're going to take a look at right now, La Ferme de Quatre Temps, which translates to the farm of 4 seasons. It's an experimental and research and development farm that also is run by the same farmer from La Grelinette. What happened about 6 years ago is that the main farmer at this place let the wife to run this farm, which was the best idea that could have happened, because she did a fantastic job in training new farmers on this farm and running the place and really optimizing it, where it left more time for my mentor, Mr. Fortier, to go on and create this gigantic farm, in the world of small-scale farming, as a big farm that is run without any tractors, to create an atmosphere, create a research and development farm that focuses on training 10 farmers every 2 years. So this is a place where they get probably 200 to 300 applicants that would like to join the farm and learn about the best practices on this farm. And then only 10 are chosen every year. And they actually get to live and work together on this farm. And every 2 years, the whole 10 farmers change to new 10 farmers that come. And they only take on farmers to join this program or this farm with the premise that they're going to go through the 2-year training and then actually go and start a farm on their own. So it's a farm that here in this photo, I'm only showing a little bit of it. I wasn't able to find a bigger drone photo, but it's a holistic farm that has animals on it. It has chickens, pigs that roam around in the forest part of the property. You can probably write down the name and look up their website. It's a fantastic place that they have created, and the mentor basically comes in and out of the picture from the production point of view, and basically trains the farmers to learn the most fundamental things within those 2 years practice them, and then move on to create their farming enterprises. Last time I checked, I think this farm generates about 350,000 euros per season. And the reason that they're calling it 4-season farm is because part of the research and development is to really figure out how, with using tunnels and greenhouses, without having to spend so much energy or money heating them, how can they grow more food during the colder months of the season so that they can have a little bit of income and they don't have to shut down the entire operation. So it's, again, since it's a research and development project, it continues to really test models and they might have failures every year, and they just keep pushing the limits of what is possible. So the final farm that I want to showcase, which we're gonna go a little bit more in details if the time allows. I'm just gonna check. Is the farm that I have been a part of creating from absolute zero. This is a drone. This is actually a satellite image from 2018 when I moved to Sweden, and there was only a school garden on the bottom right corner of the property, which was used for a place for kids from neighboring schools to come and basically be outside and learn about different types of seeds and flowers and different vegetables. Often kids would come and take the first carrot out of the ground and would say, "Oh, I thought carrots would come from the store where mommy buys them from." And you know, it's really adorable to see kids at really early ages get involved with food production and really question things and learn the way that we used to live our lives before we got so disconnected with our food system. So moving forward, during this time in the end of 2018, we started doing a lot of planning to figure out what would be the best design for this farm. And of course, coming with my background in growing microgreens initially, with the first thing that I ever grew, I thought that I would start with that since we were going into winter, and by growing microgreens, I was able to take at least some products in my hand and go and knock on doors on restaurants and meet chefs that we wanted to get on board with the project to support the farm commercially. This is a photo from the next year. So this is the first year that we were in production in 2019. We generated about 33,000 euros on only 550 square meter of space. This is basically the space that you see on the top left corner. All the numbers that I'm going to talk about with this farm is related to the top left corner of the property that is under commercial production. The other 4 corners of the farm that you're going to see in the following slides are dedicated to different projects. So one, as I said, is a school garden. The top right corner is a social garden for families that live around the neighborhood, and they come and it's basically a way for us to create interaction, social interaction with people, to break the barriers. There's a lot of different cultures living in that neighborhood from many different countries. So we found that using food and gardening as a tool to bring people together, we might be able to create these type of social interactions. And finally, the last corner of the property that you're going to see in the next photos, here you can see it on the bottom left corner. It was tarped using these black plastics that really smother the weeds and get rid of the grass, which is the best technique that we've found if you have the time. So we would basically just leave the plastic for a whole year, and then after the second year, we would remove it and start working the soil for the first time to grow things in. This slide focuses on the 2020 season where the pandemic hit. And surprisingly, because we acted really quickly in the beginning of the pandemic, you know, we thought that since the farm was focusing more on selling to restaurants only, it would be really fragile to only rely on restaurant sales. So we introduced a veggie bag program on the farm. which was not the initial plan from the beginning. But as anyone else who experienced the pandemic, we had to come up with ways to basically make things go around without having to shut down the operation. So it ended up being one of the best seasons that we had eventually, generating about 38,000 euros through restaurant sales, 14,000 euros feeding to 40 families on this small space. So 1,500 square meter of space was being used. From here on, that is the top left corner, this square that you see here. And we had some, of course, initial investment costs of 18,000 euros in the beginning. And then in 2020 year, we did a little bit more investments to expand the operation and buy some more tools. And we trained about 8 students on the farm. So I'm taking basically the same model that is applied on the bigger farm, Ferme de Quatre Pommes, the 4-season farm that we looked at, but in a very tiny space. To really test that model and see, the fact that we're right in the middle of the city. There is a lot of exposure for people to see the farm, to get involved. So there's a lot of students from different fields that might pop by the farm and join the 2 months program that we run on ongoing basis throughout the whole season. The third year in 2021, we ended up doing major changes to the center piece of the farm, which is the heart of the farm, you would say. There's mushroom production, there's microgreens, there is a couple of containers that we put all the tools in, and it's a space where we can do workshops under the roof if the weather doesn't allow doing much on the fields. And of course, this piece ended up being completely redone, and we wanted to offer farm to table dinners. So we ended up going through a major change here in the last season in 2022, which was this season, to create an atmosphere where people would come during summer and we would basically take food directly from the farm, set up a barbecue here, and our kitchen staff would basically provide daily meals fresh off the farm. Here you can see in the bottom left corner that this space was used as a test bed, which I'm going to discuss in the coming slides. So again, throughout these last 2 years, we also were working on mentoring startups. So this is something that I'm going to mention talking about the ecosystems. So I'll just circle back to this. I hope that I'm not going too quickly. There's a lot of information, of course, but hoping that everyone is absorbing the information. And gladly, we're recording this presentation, so you can watch it many times. Hopefully that will make it easier to understand. So here, we're going to talk about the how part. We talked about the why, the what, and this is the how. We think small-scale farming is changing the world, and that is really about, there's this Chinese proverb that I really like. It says, give a man a fish and he can eat for 1 day, but teach him how to fish and he can eat for a lifetime. So that is basically the core fundamental basis of this program that we call Statsbrück. It's about looking at the problem that we have. Average age of farmers are high. Not many people are interested in growing food, but there is a lot of local food demand. Everywhere you go, there's people asking questions. They want to be able to support local food production. So the demand is there. We just need more farmers growing food for the demand to meet these 2 markets and bring it to equilibrium. So the goal of this is to increase the number of local growers and ecological farmers in and around cities. In the cities, of course, because most of the people live within the city limits. And as I always say, city farms or farms that are within city limits are not just farms that grow food within the city limits. They're a place of inspiration and education for a lot of people to get involved and understand where food comes from and why is it important to talk about this. So how do we do that? We do that through combining entrepreneurship, which is basically thinking how can you basically walking into the mindset of thinking as a businessman or a businesswoman and combining that with small scale farming practice. So this marriage is what makes the whole program interesting, because we often see that a lot of people who want to be part of the solution and who want to do good and be a change maker happen to only think about the farming side, the growing side, and they completely forget that if you end up going and getting access to a piece of land where you can grow beautiful vegetables, if you're not going to be able to sell them, then you're not going to be able to make money. And that really is the focus on this, because the entrepreneurship training has to be there to open the eyes of these new growers, these young growers, to understand what goes into the business side of small scale farming, which is really, really interesting. You know, these numbers that you see from the case studies are numbers that have inspired many, many young farmers that come from many different backgrounds. Some of them are surfers or skaters, they're ex-engineers, or maybe they were studying law and they quit that to become farmers. So it really is inspiring them to look into the business models and see how can they actually use a piece of land to generate that type of an income to support themselves and their families. So another part of the how is to facilitate physical spaces for this type of creation, to also train facilitators that can run these type of programs. So here I have a map of places that we have been able to train facilitators to replicate this type of model in their cities. Of course, starting from Malmö, which was the headquarter of this place that I was a part of from the creation. And then Gothenburg, Norrtälje, these are the three cities that we have in Sweden. And each municipality, each region has basically reached out to find out how can they replicate this model? What is it that they need to go through to be able to create these physical spaces for people to come and do these type of work? Oslo, Trondheim, and Bergen are three regions that we also have done very similar things in Norway, but more on a countryside farming model rather than city farming and creating urban spaces. Göttingen and Zurich were also part of a two-year program, a two-year project that was co-financed through 2021 and 2022 season. And we haven't had much update from them, so we don't really know exactly where in the timeline they are, but they were part of the program, and we had trained some facilitators in those two cities to help them develop these type of ideologies and these type of physical spaces. And we never know, maybe the next city is going to be Warsaw. So hoping to have an open discussion about that. So what is it about this ecosystem that we're talking about? There's three different components, as you saw in the beginning of my slides in the agenda. So there's an incubator program, and mainly I'm just going to go through this really quickly. Incubator is basically a place where, for example, if you had an idea of a software or a product, you would go and you would seek mentorship from a group of people that had done it before, had run companies based on certain products or services, and you would seek mentorship to figure out what are the steps that you have to go through to bring your idea to creation and to fruition, right? So this particular incubator program focuses on on facilitating the journey for the startup, for the people that want to become food actors and growers and people that want to work in the sustainability of food systems. By guiding them on what path to take and how they can put their energy into creating the projects that they want to. There's many different workshops that we run throughout the year. There's different classroom type lectures that we've had, and we would travel to these different cities to facilitate these type of classes with focuses on entrepreneurship, financial planning, the whole business model based on these type of small-scale farms, what kind of sales and marketing strategies one would need to use to be able to be successful or get the business up and running, what kind of design or layout one would have to think of when it came to building the farm from the scratch, or if you were taking over an existing farm and you wanted to rethink the design or rethink the infrastructure that you needed to build on that farm to be able to facilitate this type of education. We talk about different types of toolkits, so physical tools that the farmer uses on the farm on day-to-day basis for the production, or digital tools for planning, different softwares that one can use for tracking the information on the farm, or doing the accounting and communication with with their customers or the community. To add on the education, we also thought that it would be interesting for farmers to know how to build teams, how to hire on their farm, how to offer internship opportunities or education opportunities for students to get involved. The second part of the ecosystem is the test bed, where farmers get to actually put into action all the things that they're learning through the incubator program. So you can think of the incubator program as the theory part and the test bed as the action part. It's a physical space that is provided. You can think of a farm that maybe the municipality takes over, or an organization takes over or has access to. You don't necessarily have to purchase it. It really depends on each municipality or context, of course. And this farm could be divided into really small plots, and these plots could be given access to people that you recruit to come in and use the information, the theoretical information that they're learning in the incubator, and then take it to action throughout the whole season, maybe finding their first customers or growing different types of vegetables to test certain things. It's a test bed, basically. And the last part of the basically I would say ecosystem is the educational farm, so, or a model farm. It's a place where you want to showcase a functioning model that uses these best tools and practices in this type of farming. You want to provide a physical space for people that maybe they're not feeling ready to start a farm, or maybe they don't feel ready to go on that incubator program or the test bed, but they want to get their hands dirty. They want to be part of the journey. They want to be around inspiring people that are working on the farm to see maybe that's a path that they want to take in their lives. And it's basically a place that you can demonstrate a certain systemized approach in growing the most amount of food in the least amount of space, you know, opening people's eyes to that opportunity and that possibility. And again, as I said before, it's a place of education and inspiration, you know, educating the general public about where our food comes from and how could it be potentially produced with the least amount of damage to the environment and all of that. So this is basically the whole presentation that I had in mind for today. Of course, there's a lot of information. I hope that there are some questions that we can go through. There's some time we can take, and then we can go back to some of the slides if things were not clear. I'll be glad to answer all your questions.
So thank you, Saba. Thank you very much. Yeah, for me it was very interesting, and I don't know if you see the chat. There is a question on the chat.
Yeah, Graza. Okay, let's see. Thank you for a very insightful presentation. I'm an owner of a small city garden, 250 square meter of space. I'm only able to grow food for myself, my family, and friends. That's beautiful. What I struggle with is the space between plants. If I use official guidelines, I get weed, and when I ignore it, the veggies are too small. Where can I find information about the distance between veggies that will allow the perfect balance? Can you recommend any online source? I can recommend you the two books that have helped me put together all the production aspects of the farm that I built. Here, I'm going to write it down in the chat. The Urban Farmer, written by Curtis Stone. The Market Gardener by Jean Martin. These are the two books that I mentioned in the beginning of the conversation. And of course, there's many other sources, such as books written by Elliot Coleman. He is the grandfather of this type of farming in the US. And he has, I think he's 80 years old now. He still has a farm. He still sometimes goes and works on the farm. And he's done really revolutionary changes to the way that one can grow the most amount of food in the least amount of space. So it is very possible that, you know, when you have problems with weeds growing between the plants, you know, that's the whole point of bringing vegetables closer to each other. But you really want to make sure that you're following the certain procedures for rotating the family of plants, making sure that your soil has enough nutrients for the vegetables to take and, you know, get to the full maturity that you want. Of course, Richard Perkins has a great book too. I've read that book as well. He also lives in Sweden. He's a fantastic, he's like a walking library, fantastic farmer. I hope that answers your question. Those would be the first two books that I would really look at. They have really beautiful charts, very detailed charts of plant spacing, and they also talk about the economic models behind these type of farms. How do you find sites for farms? How you become its owner? That's a good question. So to answer the first question, there is different ways that one can go about it. One way that I know is to, there's real estate websites specifically used for farms. For example, in Sweden, we have that. You know, if you want to go and buy a house or buy a property, buy an apartment, it would be a different website. But then there are similar websites to those for people that have pieces of land. It could be just farmland that is abandoned and it's not being used, or it could be forest lot. It could be a mix of, maybe it has a lake or some water sources. So there's different ways that one can go about it. But the best way that I have found is to really look at the geographical area that you would like to be in, and then not only look at property sales, but also go and knock on doors and see if you can connect with the landowners or talk to neighbors around that area to see who owns that piece of land, so you can have a conversation about it. You can easily put together some sort of a presentation that shows what is it that you would like to do on that property. So when you meet the potential owners, you can show them these beautiful photos of small farms that grow a lot of food, and say, yeah, this if you give me the opportunity to have access to this piece of land, this is kind of a project that I would like to create. And I'm hoping that this will create social interaction within the community members around that area, and, you know, people can come and you know, you can name all the benefits of turning that piece of land that that person has into a happening place. How do you become the owner of it is there's many different ways. Actually, a lot of the small scale farmers that I know, they don't own their land. Ownership is not necessarily the first thing that one would think, because property prices can be really expensive and you may not be able to own them. But by going and talking to the owners, you might be able to lease it, you might be able to rent the piece of land, you might be able to join forces with some community members or friends, or maybe your university, or places where it would give you a little bit more credibility towards the owner to give you access to that piece of land. In some places, you don't even have to pay for the land. I know a lot of farmers that have basically just gone on to have open discussions with the owner. It really depends if the land is owned by a private person or by a municipality. There's different approaches, of course, but if you're able to go and basically pitch this idea that, you know, this place, you know, this is the idea that you have, this is the project that you have, you really need to put that together in some sort of a one-page document or like a presentation where you can show some inspiring photos and say, okay, this is the plan that we have, this is what we're going for, this is the image that we're imagining or envisioning, looking at this piece of property to turn it into a place of happening. So those would be some of the ways that one can go about it. Claudia is asking, when discussing the origins of your farm, you mentioned startup costs. Looking back, what would you do differently? Was there anything that you would buy in a more expensive version, or something that you would not buy or do at all? That's a really good question. Let me actually bring you back to that slide that we had. Let's see, how do we do that? If I go back on slide mode, I can share my screen first. So this is the slide, and we were looking at the costs of this farm. I think it was here. Startup costs. There we go. So that was the first year, 20,000 euros in the first year. That 20,000 euros, maybe I can give you this example so that will open up some more questions. So that 20,000 euros was spent on basically getting a shipping container that we converted into a vertical farm with racks and some lights to grow microgreens. We bought 2 tunnels. We bought enough plastic to cover the field, to get rid of the grass and all the weeds that the field had. You know, the field basically looked like this when I arrived, and it was like this a few months later. So then I would say the essentials would be definitely tarps to be able to cover the ground and get rid of the initial weeds, tunnels to be able to extend the season, because that really is a great investment, and the return of investment on tunnels are so quick, because within the first year we were able to generate all the money that we put into the farm in the first place. That might not be your case, depending on where this farm is, how much work you need to do. Some farms you have to do a lot of digging projects. You need to make sure that the if there is cavities and, you know, water stays in certain areas, you need to drain it. So that requires a lot more preliminary work with some tractors to come in, do some digging, put some pipes in the ground. So it's very contextual. I know that, for example, this farm, Ferme de Quatre Temps, there has been millions of dollars that have been spent in this research and development farm to make it the way that it is now. You're only seeing the surface of it. Under the ground, there's pipes that carry the water in different locations and pours it into different ponds, for example. But if we're looking at a small farm like this, then that 20,000 euros we spent, like I said, on a shipping container, a couple of tunnels, some tarps, insect nets to protect the crops. There was of course, a lot of compost that we bought from the local composting facility in the city. A lot of seeds that we used in the, you see, we were using the 1/3 of the space in the first year. And then as year passed by, here looks like in this second season, we spent another 4,000, 5,000 euros for investments to buy more insect net. We were buying more seeds because we were in full-on production, so our production was tripled. And then a lot of tools that we use on the farm. There's tools like greens harvester. Like if you're into salad production, this would be a absolute must tool that you would use to cut greens in a really efficient way. It's basically a basket that you can connect to a little um, electrical drill, and that basically just moves the blade to cut the salad greens. There is a tilther by Johnny's, let's say. There's a tool like this that also uses a electric powered drill for preparing the beds. I would not start a farm without a tool like this. It's called tilther. This tool doesn't disturb the soil. It only just mixes the first 5 centimeters of the soil. So you can potentially go in there, prepare the soil, add some compost, and then run this machine on it a couple of times to create a really nice bed before planting. There's weeding tools. Yeah, it's like a whole list of tools that one can actually look at. I don't think we have time to go through that, but let me go back on the question just to make sure I'm going in the right direction. Where were we? What would you do differently? Okay, so okay, I would not. Let me see. I would, if we didn't want to, yeah, I would say, looking at the slide, let me see if I can find the slide again here. This big structure that we built, took a lot of money. And we got lucky that we got some funding from a university that we are now collaborating with for students to come and get credit, university credit for working on the farm for 2 months with us. But it took a lot of money to build this infrastructure. And if I were going to do it differently, I would not build it so big. We would probably go with maybe 1/3 of the building, because that also casts a lot of shadow on some of the growing space that we could potentially grow more food and generate more money. So it ended up being a little too big. That's what I would do differently. Another thing I would do differently would be to invest in more tunnels in the beginning, because especially if you're growing in a cold environment, or if you're context in a place where you need to have products in the beginning of the season, early, like very early spring or late in the winter, that will give you a cutting edge to find more customers that can potentially be part of your farm's success. So that would be something that I would do differently. If I had the money, I would probably buy more tunnels. Let's see now. What else do we have there? Was there anything that you would buy in a more expensive version? Not necessarily. Oh yeah, water irrigation parts. I would never ever buy plastic parts that you would connect to hoses. I would go with metal, because they last forever. But the plastic, they always break, and I'm talking about these plastic couplings that you can connect things to extend a pipe or something like that. So those quick connections are really fragile and they break. So I would definitely get an expensive version of it. I would not buy cheap tunnels, because that is very expensive. You think that you're saving money by buying cheap tunnels, but it ends up being more expensive to repair them or replace them. So I would definitely get tunnels that are more solid. If you're interested, we've worked with a French company in France that designs these type of tunnels for small scale farms, and we can potentially share the information on that. Do you think that the model that combines different activities around food, supplying restaurants, vegetable packages for individual customers, organizing lunches for the community is the best one? It's really hard to say which one is the best one because it depends on your context. If you're in a context where there is a lot of, let's say, foodies around you, people that like to go and dine in restaurants. Scenario would be very similar scenario to the one that I was working with. When I moved to that city, I did a little bit of research and see, do people like to go out and sit at restaurants and eat? Then maybe it's a good idea to go and connect and become friends with chefs in the city and see if they could be the primary customers of the farm. And in that context, it really worked. But again, like I said earlier, when the pandemic happened, we were not really sure if we were going to be able to continue selling all the volume that we wanted to those restaurants. So we had to basically diversify our business and only putting not to put all our eggs in the same basket, selling to restaurants. So we were selling to private people too. And of course, if you are going to serve a community, then it's a great thing to have maybe have community farm days. So some community members that are part of the farm can actually come and be part of some of the farming activities that you do. You would be really surprised that people want to actually go to a farm and maybe work 2-3 hours just to feel good about what they're doing. There's a lot of criticism that we get on this farm that I've built because the students that come, a lot of people from organizations or companies or maybe municipalities come and they say, okay, well, you're running this farm with the help of students and you're using their free labor, but the students wouldn't see it that way. And we certainly don't see it that way because it's an exchange of knowledge and experience. So they're gaining knowledge, they're gaining physical real life experience that they wouldn't be able to get anywhere else. No university will give you that physical working experience working on a farm to see how it actually functions. So they don't see it as free labor. They see it as actually, if you ask me, I have to spend double or sometimes triple the amount of time to explain to students how things functions. Whereas if the students weren't there, I would just go and do things. So I wouldn't have to explain anything, right? So there is some criticism, but that's how I approach that particular problem. And I think that's also why I see these type of farms as inspiration and educational physical places, because there are a lot of people that are becoming aware of environmental problems, climate change, and they want to do things. They want to go in a place where they can take an action and get their hands dirty. So why not create these physical spaces for people to get involved? And in return, they can help you with a lot of the repetitive tasks that you have on the farm. For example, on harvest days or on planting days, you can get some physical help from them. And in return, maybe after the day of work, you can give them a free bag of vegetables to take home. And that really creates community. So do I think that the model combines different activities around the food is the best one? Maybe. I think any business that is based on diversified model and it has multiple different things has a really large benefit compared to one that only focuses on one particular niche. But you really have to be careful not to burn yourself out if you're building an organization or a project like that, because we all come from many different ideas. We want to do everything. We want to work with restaurants, we want to have community, we want to have vegetable packages for individual customers, as you say, and doing all of that from the beginning is very hard. So you really have to understand how to set smart goals from the beginning and say, okay, we're going to start very small. and we're not going to do all the ideas that we want. We're going to have to think about this project as a 3-year or a 5-year plan, and actually sit down and plan it and see, okay, what actions are we going to take in the first season? What is the phase 2? What is the phase 3? Where do we want to be in the 4th season? Do we want to have students come to the farm in the 3rd season? For example, in the first year when I started the farm, I didn't want anyone around me because I just wanted to focus on all the very necessary and fundamental things to set up on the farm before receiving any interns or volunteers or students. I didn't want any distraction. But middle of the season, I changed my mind because I saw that a lot of people wanted to be part of the creation of the place. So in my context, that worked. Maybe in your context, it would be something different. In Poland, it rather doesn't work like that. Okay, how does it work? I want to know. How important is the soil quality in the growing space? Very, very important. Because you talked about building the soil up. Yes. If I wanted to buy some land, would I have to take the quality of land into consideration a lot and buy a land where the soil is great? Or it's possible to take care of medium? That's a very nice question. I would say, yes, it is very important, but it is not a showstopper. Let's go back on the first case study, the Green City Acres. That was a city farm on 3 different plots of the city. It was actually on 3 plots when I arrived on the farm to have my training. But apparently in the beginning, they had like maybe 5 or 6 different locations in the city. So they used to bike to all the locations. And if I'm not mistaken, 2 or 3 of the locations were actually complete contaminated soil. So there was a house there, or there was a building, and they had to tear it down. And there was a lot of contamination in the soil. So the soil was not so pure. So they had to do a lot of cleanup. They basically had to spend the initial investment money to bring in new soil, at least for that little spot of land to use. So they put in maybe $5,000 to $10,000, whatever that is in euros, to build the soil up in the beginning. And then every year after that, they were adding very big loads of compost to build up that soil. So it is possible to start with, there are projects that don't even have soil, and they build these really high raised beds, and then you buy soil and you mix it with compost and you put it inside those wooden boxes to create an urban farm, let's say. So there are urban farms that have been built on concrete floors. So it really depends where you want to go with this project and what is it that you want to do. But I want to make sure that I emphasize on the importance of testing the soil, or at least asking the neighbors, okay, what was this land being used for? Was this last farmer spraying a lot of shit on the land the whole time? How contaminated is it? So it is important to look into the history of the land before you get involved. I would definitely recommend that, but it shouldn't be a showstopper. Again, context is everything. What is that? Buy a land where the soil is great, or it's possible to take care of medium quality soil. Yeah, okay, we went through that question, I guess. I hope I answered that question. Do you know if the case, Julian, thanks for the question. Do you know if the case study market gardens have rotations implemented? Oh yeah, definitely. You wouldn't start a market garden without rotating the family of vegetables. That is one of the basic principles of ecological farming. If I go through it really quickly, you use organic seeds, organic, you don't use any GMOs, you don't use any chemicals, you always think about feeding the soil rather than feeding the plants, meaning fertilizers. You always think about rotating the family of vegetables. You always think about if you have the opportunity to use cover crops. So for example, put a piece of the farm, if you're producing on it this year, give it a break for 1 year, plant something that can cover the soil, and then basically kill that crop, tarp it, put the black tarps on top of it to make sure that that decomposes and goes back into the soil to fix the nutrients. So all of these things that I mentioned are the very base principles of ecological farming, and that is all done more or less on majority of the market gardens that you see around the world. That is the whole point of doing it that way. Now, a farm, depending on the context, might not have the opportunity to use cover crops. For example, this farm that I run, I haven't been able to implement cover crops on it, but I always move the family of vegetables. So when we're done with the family of vegetables, I know that from the previous year, looking at the farm map, all the kale family was in one part of the farm. So we're not going to grow any kale family in that part the next year. We're going to move them to somewhere else. So there is rotation for sure. But because of the size of the farm, I'm not able to do cover crops. So what I do is that I just use more compost every year on top of the soil every season when we start the farm, and also when we close down the garden for winter, we just cover it so it doesn't get rained on the whole winter, or it doesn't get snowed on, and also that tarp is going to protect the soil and it's going to make sure that in the spring it warms up a lot quicker and it's not so wet, so we can actually get in there and use the soil and work with it. Whereas if it was not covered and it was just naked, it would just get oversaturated with a lot of water, and that obviously leads in leaching the nutrients that is just going to get washed down the slope if you're on a slope, or you're going to have problems with the soil fertility. Are any of the market garden farms certified organic? Yes. The last two case studies that I mentioned, the two French farms are both organic, certified organic. Our farm is not, and I don't think it will be. Not because we want to cheat or go with anything against what the organic certification wants, but because we don't need to do that. We communicate everything that we do with our customers, and they pay the premium price as if it's a certified organic product, without us having to go through the payments and the inspections and things like that. And our customers are always coming to the farm, so they see what we're doing. We get them involved. I have chefs that come to the farm to sometimes even work on the farm, and they come and plant with us because they want to learn how we do it. And they see that we, from the seeds to the compost to the fertilizers that we use, everything's certified organic, but we don't have the certification, for example. So I think it really comes down to how you're communicating about what you're doing. And I think the most important part of that is to be able to say, why is it that you are doing this? Because when you're able to very freely talk about the why, the reason behind what you're doing, which in most of the cases because you want to save the planet and you want to move away from all these negative aspects of chemical farming, customers are going to understand that, and they might not really require you to have the certification. Do you think there can ever be an oversaturation of small-scale farms where it becomes unprofitable to run them? This is a question that comes up in every lecture. At least there's one person that asks that. And I like that because it needs to be questioned. But my take on it right now is that no, I don't think it could be saturated in one city if there's a lot of urban farmers. In Malmö, the city that I farm in, we have this program. So every year we're pumping out new farmers into the market, and they go and start farms. Some of them become successful. Some of them decide that, okay, this is not for me. But we're seeing that in some areas, it has been a little oversaturated in a way that if the farmer is thinking about the exact same customers or exact same neighborhoods or areas that the other farmers are selling, then you're going to feel the competition and you're going to feel like, okay, now it's getting too much. But we try to help them to think outside of the box and think other places, think other sorts of customers, and try to be innovative. If you're a farmer that focuses on families, maybe the other farmer can focus on companies. You would go and knock on companies' doors, and you would get companies to invest in seasonal produce for their employees, or maybe you can collaborate with yoga studios or health practitioners, or there's many different ways that one can actually think of it. So in certain ways, maybe it can be oversaturated, but when you look at it, there's a lot of people in our cities. And if you know how to find your community, there is going to be many years until this thing can be oversaturated. And that oversaturation, when we reach that, it's actually a good thing, because that means that a lot more population are actually supporting small-scale farmers. So that means that we have reached a point where general public awareness has raised to a point where they're no longer supporting the big agriculture. They're no longer, or at least they're really questioning it, that they're choosing to go with small-scale producers and connect that, have that farmer to community connection with them. I hope that answers your question. Down-to-earth approach. If there are farms coexisting, okay, let's see how much time we have.
Saba, there's Nina Rapo raise a hand.
Okay.
While some time ago, so maybe.
I'm sorry, Nina. I didn't see that. Nina, do you want to unmute your mic so we can have it? Hey,
yeah.
Nina.
Hi. Great presentation. I wanted to ask, I'm always interested in how did you ended up working this and doing this? Like, where?
Thank you for asking.
I'm developing my own farm at the moment, and I'm also not from the agricultural family, but I'm from the city, and coming back to the roots and to the village is a dream come true from like many years ago.
Amazing.
So
it's so inspiring.
I'm in this passion.
It's so inspiring to also meet people that don't come from this background and they're so passionate about it. To give you a really good experience, Nina, answering that question, I just left a link in the chat. It's a podcast. It's like a 20-minute podcast that I've recorded with IKEA. They approached me a couple of years ago to share my story with their audience, or I think there was a expo that we were doing in a Swedish city, Helsingborg. So they were basically recording personal stories of different professions: an architect, a doctor, a farmer. I think there was a teacher. There was different professions that came to share their stories, and I happened to be the farmer. So if you're interested in finding out how I ended up in this place or in this chat room with you guys from the beginning, that would be a good podcast to listen to.
Great, thank you.
My pleasure. I think there's one question left. I want to make sure I answer that. If there are Anna is asking, if there are farms coexisting or cooperating or using in relation with weeds. Are you asking if there are farms that do that? Like very diverse grain plots. Are you having?
Yes, I'm really interested in this subject. Because it's still very, it's very using word doing any farm. I'm not sure if I want to do farm, but it's not easy ethically for me.
It's not ethical, you said?
I don't know what you said. It's just, I feel it's not full cooperation with with the possibility of the land. I don't know how to say.
Anna, can you try to formulate your question one more time? I think I'm having a hard time understanding what the actual question is.
Like very diverse grain plots. There are plots when there are like a lot of genre
Wheat.
of wheat, yeah, growing together with like it's very small scale, because to pick up like just a few different wheats, like not different grains from these wheats, and it's like very alive ecosystem. And I'm thinking if there are farms with this ecosystem. And my next question is also there are experimental places that may be experimental with this or with biodesign or it's like
okay. Oh, okay. So let me see if I understand that. So you're asking if there are any small scale farms that work on grains, like models that we looked at today, that they work on vegetables, but you're wondering if there's any farms that use small scale spaces but to produce wheats, right?
almost. But
okay.
Yeah, but this is also interesting question, but also about experimental spaces, because on our farm we thought about, there was one meeting when this appears, to make like to spread this area to free, and one area with like experimental one. So on these farms you're cooperating with, you know them, you know some spaces.
I know a couple of experimental farms that really push the limits on some of the things that you mentioned. One of them is called Rodale Institute. I'm going to write it down here. Rodale Institute. You can look at Row 7 company that sells seeds that are seeds, and they work with vegetable breeders to come up with new seeds. There is Center for Sustainable Center for Food and Agriculture. No, what is it called? Stone Barns Center for Food and Agriculture. That's a really good one. I have a lot of inspiration from Stone Barns. They work on really cool things, and they have an experimental farm. All of these places that I mentioned, they have research farms. You can also just Google research farms, or I think University of Michigan has a research farm, if I'm not mistaken. Also, University of British Columbia, UBC farm. That's a fantastic place. They have done a lot of research. But I don't. Yeah, it's all these places. It's going to be a little difficult to get into the details of their websites to find like have access to their research papers, if that's what you're looking for. But yeah, good luck. I hope you can find some information there.
Thank you for an answer. And also the grain question is the interesting one.
The grain question is what?
If there are farms producing grain also.
Oh, okay. I personally don't know of small scale grain producers, but I think that's actually something that it has been on my list to look up, because I would like to learn more about that. But I think the scalability of that is not, you can't really imagine these small scale farms that I showcased in the case studies today, because grain takes a lot of space. So maybe, yeah, you're going to have to probably Google small scale grain producer or small scale wheat production. on small acreage, something like that. Small acreage, grain production, small acreage. Okay. I would probably look under that, but yeah, I personally don't know any. Row 7 actually has some wheat that they grow themselves. They've come up with certain wheat that is like a really ancient wheat seed that they have done some breeding with some rye, I think, and they grow their own wheat seeds for the restaurant that bakes all the bread and the croissant and everything. How are we doing with time? Okay, I think we're running out of time now. Maybe I can take the last question if anyone has any.
Yeah, I will be happy to ask the question. Maybe
no,
the
sorry,
last
your
one.
time is over. You're the last one.
Okay.
go.
next
Just kidding.
time.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
No,
but I
have two. I have two.
Sure.
One is about funds for investment. What kind of experience you have with that issue? Where to look? How you manage with funds for investment?
Funds.
Funds.
You're talking about funds. Okay.
Funds, yes. And the other one is about your plans. Yeah, what are your plans now? Because you said something when we chat before the presentation about some plans, and I would like to hear what
for sure
you are working on.
Yeah, definitely. Funds, I would say, I can only talk of examples. In Sweden, also in Canada and the US, there are some funds available from the Ministry of Agriculture for people, for example, under 40 years old to start a farming enterprise. Now, Ministry of Agriculture in majority of the countries are not even aware of this type of farming that we talked about today. It's really interesting, and because if they knew about it, we would see presence of university courses based on this type of farming. And unfortunately, there are none. I don't know of many universities around the world that actually use this type of technique. It's crazy because they talk about sustainable agriculture, they talk about regenerative practices and sustainability of food systems, but I don't see any of case studies that are done by universities that showcases, hey, there are these type of farms too, and you don't need millions of dollars to invest and buy a big piece of land and get all these machinery and facilities to be able to become a farmer if you want to. So that's a really interesting thing, and makes me question, why is it that our governments in these many countries, especially in Europe, don't talk about it? Do they not know that these type of farms exist? Do they not know the potential of them? So you will see a lot of subsidiaries or a lot of fund for big farms. If you're a big farmer with tractor and a lot of land, you can always go on government websites and apply for funding or apply for more money or some operational costs and stuff like that. But there is no particular pool, like a financial pool dedicated towards small scale farmers in many of the countries. But now you see some countries and some organizations or some organizations are really working hard on that to raise that question and get the Ministry of Agriculture to make available some funds for small scale farmers. And I think it's more possible to find some funds, like for example maybe 25,000 euros, but again that's not so much money, maybe 25,000 to maybe 50,000 euros that you could apply for, and you would receive that money in a course of, let's say, 2 or 3 years. And you have to do a lot of paperwork to show to the Ministry of Agriculture that where are you using that money, and what is your plan on expanding that business and potentially receiving the rest of the fund. You will never get like a big chunk of money in the beginning, for example. They make it into a certain program that you have to stay within the program, make sure that you follow certain procedures to be able to receive the full-on fund for the 2 years or 3 years. That's the case in Sweden, for example. But there is, maybe you can look up Vinnova. Vinnova has some, sometimes they have European funds for these type of projects. There is Leader funds. I haven't personally looked at these two, Vinnova and Leader funds that I mentioned. We have used that over the last 4 years to fund certain projects, but it hasn't been much money. Universities, you could potentially do some collaboration with them. Maybe it would not come in a form of money, but it would come in a form of accessibility to a piece of land that could potentially be used for that. So it will, yeah, like I said, it wouldn't be necessary money, but they will give access to certain facilities or maybe some greenhouses. Maybe they can, students, I've seen a lot of students from universities co-creating a project and applying it through the university to get some funds, for example, to not only have access to a piece of land that the university owns and they're not using it for much, but also get some money to build a greenhouse, maybe build a post-harvest area where you can, wash the vegetables and things like that. So that's what I can. And then there's crowdfunding. I've seen a lot of farmers, especially in North America, that have raised really good, substantial amount of money on crowdfunding or GoFundMe. That's another website. If you're able to really pitch the idea of what is it that you want to do, and you can make it really nice, appealing, maybe video or presentation about it, you would be able to knock on some doors and look for investors. And these days, especially with carbon credits, maybe this is something that you can look into. A lot of companies that want to offset their carbon credits are looking for ways that they can do that by maybe putting some of their carbon taxes on projects that sequester carbon. This is called carbon farming. Unfortunately, carbon farming so far, it's very, very new. It has only started maybe 2 years or 3 years, as far as I know. They really work on big farms that have animals incorporated, because they're combining regenerative farming, whatever regenerative farming is promising right now, which is to use a lot of piece of land to grow certain things and do rotational grazing of animals on it to be able to store carbon in the soil. They're working on that, and I see it as like a coin that has two heads. One side of it is basically, one side of the coin is the carbon world, the carbon investments. So there's basically just a bunch of investors and people that work on their computers, and they have nothing to do with farming. They just want to move money from one place to another and maybe make some profit somewhere. And they're working on the carbon side. So they find companies that want to offset their carbon taxes and connect them with farmers that are adopting those type of regenerative practices. So the farmer ends up getting some funding from that tax money or that carbon tax, and it allows the farmer to actually go ahead and do that type of practice, which results in carbon sequestration. So there's a lot of cool stuff happening around. You just have to look in the right place. And unfortunately, because I've been so busy building the farm, training people, and working with facilitators of these type of projects, I haven't really dive deep enough into the funding parts. This is something that I would really love to learn, which brings me to your second question. and that is that I am now making myself available for many different projects to get my hands in, because there's some when people like you or some organizations that want to start adopting or replicating these type of models, this kind of like incubator program and stuff like that in their city, they need to find an expert to include in their budget, include in their project, and to be able to get funds for. So when you say, what is your plan? What do you want to do? And that is what I'm focusing on. I'm building a new farm project this next year. My work with Botinabor organization is now finished. It was a 4-year project that I was part of. My job was to go in, build the farm, get it up and running, find customers, build an education program on it, and then leave it to someone else to run it, so I can go and replicate that in other place. So I needed to free up my time, so I no longer have to run that farm, and that allows me to have these type of discussions with you and see if I can get my hands into multiple different projects. So the plan is to do as much as of that as possible within the next year, while I'm building my new farming project at my house on my own land.
But in Sweden or in Canada?
No, in Sweden. In Sweden. I'm staying in Sweden. I'm only visiting family in Canada.
Okay, so it will be closer to
Oh,
Warsaw.
and to travel, I forgot to mention, and to travel. My plan for 2023 season is to travel, meet organizers and facilitators in different cities and different countries, and try to get things happening, trying to just share as much knowledge as I have, because I love these type of projects, and I think I have so much to share, and I really want to get my hands in these type of projects. So part of my plan is going to be to travel in Europe and see if I can get involved with more European projects.
Okay, Saba, I think we should finish. Yeah, we are a little bit over the time. Thank you very much. It was very interesting. And I hope we will meet in Warsaw in the next year.
I would love that, yes. And please, I wanted to thank everyone for joining us here too. Thank you especially for making this happen. Thank you for inviting me, and make sure that you, I'll write down my email address here for everyone. If you haven't shared that with people, you can connect with me however you want. The culinary.
Yeah, you can also check your Instagram. Yes.
Yes, you can contact me on Instagram as well. The Culinary Farmer on Instagram. Yeah, I hope to be able to connect with you in the next year. I wish you guys a happy holiday season and happy new year, and hope that we can do something in the next year.
Yeah. Thank you, Saba, and thanks for everybody who participate. And I just want to remind you that tomorrow we have this event, exhibition about the beginnings of our farm. And if you are interested in more information about this, please come, or I will write to me. I just put my email address here.
Awesome, I will check it out.
Yes. Okay.
I'm gonna sign off now. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
You too. Thank you. Good night.